press record on my thing. And then should we do 3, 2, 1, and then we'll do the clap, and then we'll start. Right, okay. 3, 2, 1. Did you clap then?
Yep.
It must have been perfectly, just coordinated to perfection.
Yeah, maybe.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Dark Natter, the podcast that waits alongside dead Cthulhu in his house at Arlier. Not sure about that. I am John Richter.
And I'm Liam Martin.
And this is the season finale of Season 1 of Dark Natter. Is that, are you celebrating?
Was that the right time?
It's always the right time. There's never a wrong time to cackle ominously.
Well, it's celebration time. We've got a full house down there. Well, maybe you should tell them what we do first before I get carried away.
Oh yeah, so when you say down there, you of course mean crawling along the cramped, creepy, crusted with gore corridors of the Hall of Pain. I thought you'd spent the laugh, but you had another one up your sleeve, so that was good.
Last-ditch laughter.
And yeah, we have a chat, don't we, about a dark fiction topic to decide whether said topic is a worthy entrant into that decrepit dungeon. So we've saved a banger up for the last one, a real big hitter.
Worth pointing out that if you haven't listened before, there's 100% record for hit rate, for stuff going into the Hall of Pain. So the standard's pretty low. So
basically, the formula is we pick something that we both already like, talk about how good it is, and then decide whether it deserves a place in our Hall of Fame. So,
which of course it does, because we both like it.
We already like it. So it could be argued that it's a slightly flawed concept, but the real question is: do you like listening to two aging horror dark fiction nerds?
Hey, speak for yourself.
Sorry, you're not. I was trying to turn that into some banter, then and I just cocked it up. Sorry, I'm too excited. It's the season finale, man. I'm already drunk. No, not really. Because it's a Monday when we're recording.
And this week we're not even really. It's not even one pitching to t'other. We're just talking about H.P. Lovecraft.
That's right. We thought we would do the shadow that sort of extends a long dark shadow across the whole of pop culture, horror, dark fiction, video games, board games, films, books. He has cast a long century spanning shadow as old Howard Phillips Lovecraft. That's the man. He is our subject for our final outing today. So
put your bets on now. Do you think he'll get into the Hall of Pain, seeing as how we both fucking love his work?
You'll see. Watch this space. Hey, but just before we get started then, just while this is a finale episode, do you want to reflect on some of the highlights of the Hall of Pain in the season to date? Have you got any particular favourites? Any episodes you've enjoyed recording, or did you hate all of them?
No, I've kind of blocked them out, really. Trauma,
PTSD. It's from your perspective, this is almost like the debut episode, isn't it?
Well,
really?
There's actually a lot of symmetry here, because the first episode we talked about Stephen King, famous modern day author of
That's right.
horror and dark fiction. And today, the series finale, we're talking about another famous author, albeit one from a different century. So, yeah, kind of nice symmetry there.
Oh well, I suppose they bookended the century. They did, maybe that's a good way to look at it, isn't it? The 20th century was bookended from a horror writing perspective by those two titans. And we've covered Mr. King, so now we're going to cover old Mr. Lovecraft,
who was born in 1890, which is why I said about the different century.
The different century. He was indeed. He lived until 1937 and died in a degree of, sort of poverty and general unhappiness, as far as I understand it. So certainly his works have become hugely famous and celebrated posthumously. So he died unaware of the influence that he was to go on to have, which is an interesting thing. Like I write books, and I sometimes think, would you take that if somebody said to you, hey, your books are going to become really, really famous, but only after you're dead? I mean, I'd take it now, because as it stands, they're not really famous now, and they're not going to be famous after I'm dead either, so it seems like a no-brainer. But
I was thinking more of the death thing.
Would I die now in order to...
Yeah.
Ooh, what, like knock years off your lifespan in order to get more fame after you've gone? A bigger legacy.
So he was 46, 47. I think he was 40. He died March 15th, so he's 46 when he died. So how many years are you away from that?
I am, in 9 years, I'll be 46.
So would you take that? You've got 9 years left.
So basically it's a guaranteed death in 9 years.
Yeah.
But in return, I get...
You become one of the most famous, and
people making second-rate podcasts about my work 100 years later. I mean, that is a pretty... Hang on a minute. All this time, I've known you as Liam Martin. Is this the devil? Are you Beelzebub? And is this a real offer?
Interesting story, but one of my nicknames at school was actually Devil Boy.
Oh, was it?
Because I had 2 lumps on my head from injuries.
Oh, wow.
2 head injuries, yeah. So
and because you kept offering people bargains to kill them.
And I think, based on having watched the Simpsons episode, I think I did buy my friend's soul as well for like a Mars bar or something. I was into all that kind of shit.
What did you do with his soul in the end?
I just wiped my ass with it or something.
Yeah.
So
fair enough.
I was a real piece of shit then, and I'm a piece of shit, bigger piece of shit now.
That's very good. Well, speaking of pieces of shit, and I will explain that remark a bit later, but yeah, let's talk Lovecraft. As we've already said, he was a writer of dark fiction.
Yeah,
shed loads of dark fiction. So I've got this lovely, beautiful sort of complete works tome on my bookshelf.
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
I've got that one with the silver pages.
I've got a different one. I've got 2 separate tomes. They're kind of leather bound, black. They're great though. Yeah, really, really like it.
It's one of those books that slightly annoyingly is too beautiful to ever actually read, because you don't want to pick it up and grubby it with your fingerprints. So I got that, and then I bought a Kindle version to actually read, which was a bit stupid. And his complete works are... He wrote a lot. He was very much a short story specialist.
Yeah.
So his idol was Edgar Allan Poe, master of the sort of short horror story in even further back into history. Although Lovecraft did write some slightly longer, more like novellas. I'm not sure any of his stuff would qualify as a novel. Having read it all, I think the longest thing he wrote was a novella at best, kind of thing. But I think that structure, I think short stories work really well for horror anyway. So I think it suits the genre.
Well, you've got a few collections out yourself, haven't you?
Indeed I have, inspired by...
I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help your career, motherfucker.
He's very kind of you. But yeah, certainly. Well, I'll maybe plug them at the end of the episode. But yes, I have got a couple of short horror collections out, and I can only dream of the sort of recognition that H.P. Lovecraft achieved, and deservedly so, because some of his stuff... Well, Some of his stuff is not very good, let's be honest. Some of them are, as with any writer, a prolific writer, you're bound to get patchy, variable quality.
Yeah.
But the best ones are... Some people say they think Lovecraft was quite a bad writer, and the reason he's become famous is because of his completely, literally out-of-this-world ideas. I actually think he's a good writer, and I think that's a bit of an unfair criticism. And I think that, my personal favourite Lovecraft story is The Shadow over Innsmouth, which is, I think, is an excellent, tense, scary, wildly original horror story. And I don't think it's badly written at all. I think it's really good. I don't know if have you got a favourite one?
I really like The Dreams in the Witch House.
Oh, go on. I don't even really remember what that one's about.
Guy moves into sort of an apartment, and again, it's all that thing with like geometry, like it just doesn't quite look right. And he ends up kind of just experiencing weird dreams, and it turns out he's kind of in the midst of his building is kind of like a gateway to, sort of other worlds. And
okay. And his sanity begins to crumble as he realises the eldritch truth kind of thing. Yeah,
so, and there's like a sort of witch and the familiar, and it's just really good.
Excellent. The Shadow of Innsmouth is, as I've said. There's also others you may have heard of. At the Mountains of Madness. I'm actually reading a manga adaptation of that, which is brilliant. There's The Shadow Out of Time. There's The Colour Out of Space, recently made into a movie starring Nicolas Cage, which was a lot of fun. Have you seen that yet?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
Oh, it's ace. He does this really crazy Nicolas Cage voice during it when he's freaking out, and it's worth watching just for that. That was a terrible impression, but it is a good film. The Dunwich Horror, Dagon, and of course, The Call of Cthulhu, because Cthulhu is undoubtedly his most famous and enduring creation. The sort of... It's one of those things that's almost become a bit... The actual characteristics of Cthulhu have been absorbed into a kind of a broader caricature.
Yeah.
So Cthulhu is a great big gigantic mountain-sized sort of aquatic ancient elder god that lives in the sea, or slumbers beneath the sea until it's awoken by, cultists. And in that story, The Call of Cthulhu, I think it's one of the few stories where you actually meet Cthulhu himself.
Yeah.
And he's just this great big creature with a sort of... if you imagine a humanoid male figure, albeit a giant one, with a big squid plopped onto it instead of a head, that is, in effect, what Cthulhu looks like. So whenever you see anything, anywhere, in any kind of fantasy game, story, and it's a kind of tentacled horror, Warhammer, there's so many times that's just a complete trope, isn't it? The kind of chaos mutant tentacled monstrosity. That has been lifted from the works of Lovecraft. That's where they got their idea from.
Yeah. And Christ, you see that a lot, don't you?
It's just completely... ubiquitous almost as a horror trope, that sort of creature design, and we'll come on maybe later to some of the many things, our favourite things that Lovecraft and his menagerie of creatures has influenced. But that is an image you see all the time. And I had a long period of my life where I knew there was a thing called Cthulhu, because you see it referenced in nerd literature, but I didn't really know what Cthulhu actually was. So when I finally got around to reading some of his stuff, it's like, oh, right, okay, this makes sense of it. Well, it might be worth pointing out that one of the things that Lovecraft did that Stephen King also did, which I really like, is that he, although his works were all separate standalone stories, almost all of them, there was very few kind of serialised tales with recurring main characters, he used to reference this kind of wider, what they call the mythos, the Lovecraft, the Cthulhu mythos. So you'd hear Cthulhu would be mentioned, the Cthulhu cult would be mentioned, the Necronomicon, this forbidden book of dark, unspeakable, stuff, that would be referenced all the time. Arkham was the setting for lots and lots of his stories, the fictional... Is it fictional? I assume it's fictional. Place in Massachusetts. The Miskatonic University, where they would research all of these dark, occult tomes. So I like how he managed to make that a really convincing kind of interweaving narrative that cut across all his stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in Witch House, I talked about earlier, he kind of dreams himself into the center of chaos, where he meets one of the deities in Cthulhu mythos, and so sort of in a lot of his sort of more famous works, you do get a taste of this kind of connecting universe, which is all the rage these days, isn't it?
It is, and you get I think what I like about it is you get the sense that it isn't. He's not desperately trying to shoehorn all of his plots together so they all link in a kind of contrived way, which maybe is me having a pop at some of these universes because I find them all a bit hard to swallow at times. But this one was more, you got the sense that there was this big thing, this big sinister, writhing tentacled universe, and all of his little stories were just tiny scratches at the surface of it, and you were just kind of peering in through a little peephole at what was really going on, but you never would really quite find out. And I think I love that. So it felt like when you read all this stuff, you just wish there was more stuff. There's loads of unanswered questions, it feels like. Yeah,
definitely, yeah, and which is kind of the fun of reading it, because it's kind of trying to sort of piece together where each novel fits in, short story, novella fits in with each other, and the sort of cross-referencing some of the sort of mythical beings he mentions and locations, and it's just it's just really fun. You kind of feel like you're playing detective when you're reading them.
And it does get a bit. I mean, he does love a name and a place name, and he gets a bit carried away describing the layouts of places and architecture at times, but so he does get a little bit when you're reading these really long rambling paragraphs about some of the different entities or deities that exist within his realm, and it's just a list of weird words, but actually it is fun to then spot when they reappear in other stories, and obviously they do reappear in other, like just a completely random one. Like we were talking before we started recording about Final Fantasy VII, because the remake's been out recently, and I'm a bit slightly disappointed with it in some ways. It just sort of hasn't got the same magic as the original. But the villain of the Final Fantasy VII is obviously Sephiroth, very famous to video gamers the world over. But Sephiroth is a throwaway, like a Lovecraft demon. It's in at least one of his stories.
Yeah, and there's other things in Final Fantasy as well, which you could kind of trace back to Lovecraft, isn't there? Monsters and summons and things of that nature.
The design of a lot of the creatures in those games, brilliant example of Lovecraft inspired weird tentacle stuff. And I suppose just to stress the point is, it's not so Lovecraft's the creatures. His idea was about cosmic horror. It's always called cosmic horror. There's that quote, isn't that famous Lovecraft quote that I'm now going to mangle, but it's like the oldest and greatest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and greatest fear is the fear of the unknown. And he managed to completely open this window really into this idea that there's this whole massive universe, terrifying, cold, uncaring universe full of weird creatures that exist in other dimensions that we can't even perceive in unless you're touched with madness, and none of them give a shit about humans at all and would happily just chew us up, spit us out. The world's been here for much longer than we have. They're all slumbering at the bottom of the ocean. So it's this idea of like elder things or elder beings that to even gaze upon them is to drive you mad, and our brains are not able to cope with even the sight or the idea of these creatures.
And one of the interesting things about that is something initially you would assume these things are kind of evil, but they're not. They, like you said, they just don't operate on the same kind of level that we do. They don't care about us. We're sort of insignificant to them. And so it's not like they're evil entities. I mean, I'm pretty sure some of them are kind of considered to be purposely evil, but malevolent, but some of them it's not just about it's an evil monster that's trying to destroy the world.
In other words, when you have a villain that wants to destroy humanity or wants to take over the Earth or whatever, inherently, therefore, they must give a shit about the Earth and humanity.
Yeah.
But if you're Cthulhu, you're not bothered. You got bigger literal fish to fry or something. I don't know. And he did, and the aquatic bit, the aquatic connection was. So when I got quite into just, the sea and the deep sea and the fact that, we talk about exploring space, but we've not even explored the bottom of the ocean properly.
No.
So there's loads of dead, weird stuff in the sea. Like when you watch some of the more recent documentaries where they've been able to plumb the depths a bit further, and some of the flipping horrible, they make anglerfish look like little cute normal fish. Just some of the weird inside-out seals and flipping transparent fish with eyeballs that they can look through the top of their own heads. It's like mad stuff in the sea. And I guess that was Lovecraft's inspiration, wasn't it? He wanted to capture this idea of a world that was nothing like our world.
Yeah.
So it wasn't little green men or humanoid aliens. It was absolutely mad, weird, plant-like, fish-like, cephalopod territory.
No, absolutely, and that's a good point you bring up about the kind of the bottom of the ocean, and because that is for me probably the most terrifying place I can think of. And I would actually, in a way, I've always quite liked the idea of being kind of just buried at sea, just dropped into the middle of the ocean and just sinking further down, and just what you would pass
what
up
you
against.
Might encounter.
Yeah, obviously you would, wouldn't be aware of any of it, but I just think it's fascinating and really quite frightening and just so grand and big, and it's just actually
quite inspirational in a way. The idea of what you might.
Yeah, but also quite terrifying. Yeah,
but then perhaps to link a couple of those things. So although that cosmological sort of huge scale and scope is very impressive and definitely very, very original at the time he was writing this stuff, and everyone else was kind of writing more pedestrian things about, Victorian style ghost stories or whatever. I do think in some ways he's at his best, I guess in my opinion, when he is able to weave in an element of a more compelling human story. So The Colour Out of Space is a good example. That's one that I mentioned before, the Nicolas Cage recent movie's been made, and it's a family on a farm, and a meteor crash lands on the farm, and at first they're overjoyed because it seems to herald this bountiful crop. So the tainted soil seems to be sprouting these massive tomatoes or whatever it is, bumper crop. But then, as you might expect, it all goes horribly wrong. All the food turns to shit, and then the family go insane, and all horrible things ensue. But I think because that gave you this window into his cosmic, the impact that an encounter with these cosmic forces could have on mere humans, but you did also grow to know and like the humans and feel sorry for them while they while their lives were falling apart.
Yeah, interesting. Also, kind of a just complete separate note, I always really liked one called The Outsider. It was one of the first ones I read of his, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think it was just in the book I originally bought of his. It was sort of near the beginning. And I also it'd make a really good play. It's just something that had kind of never encountered the outside world. And the kind of, again, the sort of dimensions are all a bit weird. Kind of ends up venturing out and seeing something, and it's kind of written in sort of first person almost, and then the people he sees are terrified of him, so he kind of slinks back into his sort of hiding place. But I don't know, it's just quite a sad story. I just always thought it'd make a really good play almost.
Yeah, and it's interesting that there must be some theatrical adaptations of Lovecraft stuff, but I've certainly never seen any. That would probably be quite a good idea. And yeah, another story, I mentioned it earlier, is The Shadow over Innsmouth, and that one is it's more of a people-centric story, because it's about this really, really well-crafted, sinister seaside town, real disgusting, decrepit, fish-smelling, just putrid place. and the narrator has to travel there, obviously, and I think he's inherited some property there because of some distant family connection or whatever, and he finds that all the people there have what they call the Innsmouth look, and that's like, their eyes are really far apart, and they have these kind of flat, expressionless mouths, and he's convinced he never sees any of them blink, and then. We forgot to do our, as usual, as has become the custom for Dark Natter, we forgot to give a spoiler warning. But spoiler warning, as the narrative, or minor spoiler warning, as the narrative progresses, he realises, there's none of the old. I never see any old people in this town. They all seem to retire to live in the upper floors of the houses, and you never see them. And of course, you can see where this is going. There's some sinister inbreeding between the people of the town and the demons that crawl up out of the sea. And there's, some sort of religious sort of sect that's overseeing all of this program. And you've got in effect these kind of sinister fish people who are out to get him, and there's that really tense bit where he spends the first night in the one hotel because there's some problem with the one bus that could take him out of town, and of course that's when they come for him in the night, and that may be a good link actually into Lovecraft-inspired media, because they managed to nail that scene, absolutely perfectly nail it. In the video game Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth, where you basically play through that the game is basically Shadow over Innsmouth, the game.
Well, I was going to say to you, actually, would you agree that maybe Shadow over Innsmouth is perhaps, maybe not even consciously, but the kind of second most well-known sort of Lovecraft thing, the whole sort of fish people, weird place?
I think so. I think those are the things that people would know. A lot of people would know Cthulhu, and I think the next level of knowing is that idea of like half fish, half human, disturbing hybrid creatures. That I agree. I think that's the other one that's crossed over a bit more into the mainstream.
That sort of concept of visiting somewhere, and I don't know. It feels like it's been done in quite a few different forms, albeit maybe with kind of different monsters. But definitely. In fact, one of your short stories I remember thinking was definite homage to
100%. It was that was very much the intention. It was to try
it went off in a completely different direction, but the setting in particular did feel very much
was
like
a direct homage to Innsmouth. And because I think it's our last episode was about Twin Peaks, which is another brilliantly crafted fictional town with a sinister something sinister happening behind the scenes. But maybe even more so than Twin Peaks, Innsmouth might be my favourite one of those types of towns. Like there's so many of them in fiction, but I can't think of one that I like more than reading. I'd happily, if anyone has written a story that's set in an Innsmouth-like town, I would just happily read it, you know what I mean? Just to spend a bit more time there.
Yeah. Well, as you say, the good time to talk about how Lovecraft has inspired media, because a lot of it, as you kind of alluded to earlier, you wouldn't even realise, would you?
No, correct. There are surprisingly few direct Lovecraft adaptations.
Very surprising, yeah.
We talked about the Nicolas Cage The Colour Out of Space. It's actually called the same thing as its source material, albeit they've changed the time period for the setting and changed a lot of other things. But most of the stuff is inspired is, it's got a different name, or it's a full blown, it's not a adaptation. It's much more of a source of inspiration.
Even the one I mentioned earlier, The Outsider, is kind of the inspiration for a film called Castle Freak, as is The Rats in the Walls.
That's another one in it. The Rats in the Walls, another classic that he wrote.
Castle Freak, actually, as well, is Stuart Gordon film, and Stuart Gordon, I think, is arguably made possibly the best sort of Lovecraft adaptation with what's it called?
It's not Herbert West Reanimator, is it?
Yeah.
I knew you were going to mention that, because that is That is class. But I've forgotten the names of the original stories. I can't even remember if they're called the Reanimator or they're called something.
Herbert West Reanimator, yeah.
So that's what the stories are, because he did write a series of them. They actually do have follow-ups, and they get progressively more daft. So although a lot of Lovecraft is like really earnestly kind of taking itself very seriously, he did write a few more kind of humorous things, and that was one of them. And the film is definitely humorous in it because it's just stupid.
It's really good film, actually. Really good 80s kind of horror movie, but very silly as well, and just those really over the top effects, and it's really, really very good. And
what else happens in it? What is that? The one where there's the guy who he's got like a decapitated head, but he's carrying his own head round,
and he even
with his severed head.
Yeah.
Oh, I might have to beat that out.
Definitely. Reanimator, Stuart Gordon, and he did a couple of Lovecraft ones. As I say, Castle Freak as well is another kind of homage. Yeah, not a direct adaptation. And also he did From Beyond.
Okay.
Which again is just there is a short story by Lovecraft called From Beyond.
And is that another kind of schlocky, daft movie?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that one.
Probably less so than
another movie that springs to mind. When you're talking tentacles, is The Thing, the John Carpenter classic from the 80s. That was based on a short story itself, which was Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. That was written in 1948. So I actually have read that, but I'm struggling to remember it. So what I don't know is the original heavily Lovecraft inspired, or was that just an adaptation that they took in the movie? But either way, the end result is kind of unmistakably Lovecraftian by the end.
Yeah. That's another interesting thing to say as well, because it's not just filmmakers, and we'll get to video games in a minute because we've got a few belters, but it's not just filmmakers. Other authors, like as we said about you, but other authors have actually, the whole Cthulhu mythos, and it's just brimming with kind of almost fan fiction, but professionally written fan fiction now, isn't it?
Well, I guess because it's out of copyright, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think is it 100 years? Is the statutory period where once something's over 100 years old, no one can own it anymore as a kind of intellectual property? So maybe that's why there's been it's definitely why there's been such an upsurge in Lovecraftian fiction, is because me and you could just, bang out a story about Cthulhu, and that's fine. No one owns the rights. So there's just loads of it now in games and literature, and I suppose that means there's inevitably some garbage, but there's lots of it is really good.
Yeah.
There's that game in there, Lovecraft versus Tesla. Did you see?
Oh, yeah. Never played it, actually. Yeah, never played it. Did you?
Yeah, I've got it. It's just silly. It's like you play as Nikola Tesla in some sort of mechanised robot electricity suit, and Lovecraft is the villain, and it's like he's summoned all of the creatures that he writes about to attack you, and it's just a shoot 'em up. But quite a funny idea.
Well, speaking of video games as well, it's in the Hall of Pain.
Absolutely.
Bloodborne.
Oh yeah, it's. I mean, again, massive spoiler alert for Bloodborne. So if anyone hasn't played that yet, then and you want to, then maybe skip the next 5 minutes. But yeah, Bloodborne's, the genius of Bloodborne is that its apparent presentation and marketing set it up as a kind of Victorian sort of gothic horror, with werewolves and stuff. But then the further into the game you get, the more you reveal, it's a Lovecraft game. Yeah. Brilliant.
And in the DLC as well, Innsmouth.
Yeah, totally. The fishing hamlet. Yeah. I don't think it's even named, is it? It's just called the fishing hamlet.
It's called the fishing hamlet, yeah.
A real direct homage to Innsmouth in the DLC, which is the best DLC. That oh my god. Bloodborne is so good, and the Bloodborne DLC is a work of blooming genius, isn't it? It really is.
And as you said, there have been more kind of direct video game adaptations, as you mentioned one earlier. Have they ever really done a really good Lovecraft adaptation in video game form.
I don't think they have, is the answer, in terms of direct. Obviously, Bloodborne is the pinnacle. I think we both agree on that.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
But as a direct homage, as in a direct adaptation, you've got. There's been a few recently, hasn't there? There's been that one called The Call of Cthulhu on the PS4 that was sort of flawed and a bit. I enjoyed it, but it seemed to, there were some problems in its development that sort of manifested in this felt a bit botched together as a game, albeit a fun one.
They all kind of do, don't they? A lot of these, it's probably because there's never been a really big budget direct Lovecraft adaptation, so they
Correct.
almost always feel a little bit kind of middle of the road. And as you say, some of them really quite enjoyable, and there's nothing wrong with what some people now call like a 7 out of 10 game. They're really fun to play sometimes, but there just doesn't feel like there's ever been a really polished.
No, I agree, and it would be nice, other than Bloodborne, I suppose. It would be nice to play one. Like there was that one. Was there another one last year or the year before called? Is it the Sinking City or the Sunken City, which I haven't played? But again, if you read the reviews of that, it's kind of like 3-4 out of 5.
Yeah, I've heard that one isn't even as good as the one you mentioned before. I tell you a really good one actually, which again isn't directly based on Lovecraft, but it clearly is a GameCube game called Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem.
And loads of people rave about that, and I've never played it.
It's the first game I ever saw that had a kind of sanity meter.
Yeah.
And so you would play it, and again, you don't really realise it's because you play through different time periods. So there's I think there's one bit where you're playing as like some sort of Roman soldier, and so you're playing all these different time periods, and it all kind of based in this house. The woman inherits a home, I think, and she's sort of exploring. I can't remember the exact details. It was years ago I played this, and obviously it comes to pass that there's something more sort of sinister and cosmic going on here. And yeah, it's the first game to have one of the sanity meter
and it starts messing with the player, doesn't it?
It inverts the controls,
implying that your save files become corrupted and your TV's turned off and stuff, which is brilliant,
really good. I mean, you see it a lot more now, but yeah, at the time I'd never seen anything like it, apart from maybe Metal Gear Solid with the Psycho Mantis battle.
Yeah, but he does a bit of that fourth wall breaking stuff. But that idea of having a sanity meter. Again, it's almost a trope now, isn't it? But games that directly mess, or the idea of stories about protagonists whose sanity unravels over the course of the narrative, that's a massively Lovecraftian trope. It happens in so many of his stories.
Again, not direct, but if you see a sanity meter in a video game, it's a Lovecraft thing. Yeah,
totally. And there's been one that springs to mind then, weirdly enough, is the video game Don't Starve. Did you ever play that?
I did,
the one where you're trying to, I thought that was quite good. And again, it had some cool...
Good little survival game, isn't it?
Yeah, and as your sanity deteriorates because you stranded on this desert island with no one to talk to, and it's dark and there's weird creatures, his sanity, you have to catch rabbits for food, but then when your sanity deteriorates to a certain point, they're not rabbits anymore, they're these nightmare creatures, but then if you catch them, you don't get food, you get different things from them. I thought that was quite a cool way of working the sanity mechanic into the actual gameplay.
Yeah.
Any other big Lovecraft inspired things, be they games or movies, that you would care to enthuse about?
I wouldn't necessarily enthuse about it, but when I was sort of doing research for the episode, in the Halo games, apparently there's some big sort of Lovecraft kind of inspiration.
Really?
Something called the Flood. And I've never been into... It's like an alien life form. Never been into Halo games at all.
No, not me. Never played one.
But I just thought it was quite interesting that, okay... Even something like that.
Even in something so mainstream as Halo, that's a kind of, not that I'm trying to be down on it because it's popular. It's just one of them games in it. I've never been interested in it. It just feels like Call of Duty type thing. But I didn't actually know it had an element of Lovecraft inspiration.
Well, neither did I until I researched it. And Darkest Dungeon is another good game that springs to mind.
Yeah, that's really good. Sanity. Again, that game is all about the sanity effect, isn't it? It's like... You take a troop of intrepid dungeoneers beneath the earth, and it's not so much about surviving the creatures, it's about them not going completely mad and killing each other, which is a great idea.
And I think probably Amnesia, the Dark Descent is probably worth a mention. That's very Lovecraftian, the sanity stuff. And
that's got the kind of darkness-based mechanic, hasn't it, where you start to lose your sanity if you stay in the dark for too long. So you're hiding in the dark from the monsters, but then you start gibbering to yourself and seeing cockroaches on the screen, and brilliant stuff.
And the list could go on and on. That's just video games. As we say, so many films.
And board games as well.
Board games we haven't really talked about board games in this podcast much, but you and I both like a board game, and there are some corkers.
I got that for my recent 37th birthday. My siblings, Sam and Amy, were kind enough to buy Mansions of Madness, and I had a crack at it like literally this past week, because when you were recording this, and it's got like an app, so you play the game along with an app that kind of tells you what's happening and what to do on the board. It was quite cool, actually. Quite enjoyed it.
I kickstarted kind of Lovecraft board game, and not me, I didn't set up the Kickstarter, I backed it on Kickstarter, and you and I played that. I can't think what it's called now, actually.
Is that the one that had that massive Cthulhu, plastic Cthulhu figure that you got
that was
as a
quite
special?
Good, wasn't it? That was
Brilliant.
Quite good. And
it was. I enjoyed it.
But yeah, there's quite a few, isn't there, based on
the mythos. And it's all this. It's always like gets wrapped up in some of the other tropes of kind of Victorian. Like I suppose it's a little bit later, isn't it? But like that Sherlock Holmes, like detectives.
That's right, a lot of detectives. Yeah,
it's always a detective with like one of them hats, not a Sherlock Holmes hat, whatever the other hat's called, not a trilby, whatever them hats, and like a Tommy gun, and they're always investigating some warehouse in Arkham where there's been reported sightings of strange events, and so they always, do you know what I mean? It starts to get to a point where all that kind of Victorian fiction all bubbles into one, doesn't it? And you get like Sherlock Holmes meets Jack the Ripper meets Lovecraft meets Cthulhu, and sometimes it gets a little bit boring, that, because it's been done quite a lot.
Yeah, I suppose. I wouldn't say I was necessarily bored of it, but I guess there's so much of it that some of it washes over me a little bit now.
Yeah, that's maybe, you're right. It's not boring. It's just there's lots of it because of as we say, so it's so popular. We should have mentioned actually under board games, because there's the infamous Arkham Horror board game, which is often renowned as one of the most complicated board game ever made.
Well, I've got the card game version of it, the sort of deck building card game, and I still haven't ever played it. I've kind of been waiting for you to give it a go, because you're kind of my rules guy. But
we will give it a go, Liam. You shall go to the ball of writhing tentacles. I've got Arkham Horror here, and I've only ever played it once.
Yeah, you said you couldn't get on with it, could you?
It was just too complicated. It was just not fun. You know what I mean? I think
I've heard the deck building game is a little bit more accessible, and therefore I think it's a bit more popular, but I could be wrong.
We will give it. We will celebrate when we get to have an actual face-to-face end of the season celebration soon. Hopefully, as lockdown starts to kind of unlock down, then we'll drink some booze and play some Cthulhu-based games. That'll be ace.
Sounds good to me. So we've kind of covered a lot of the good.
Yeah, well, exactly. There's one big thing we have to cover, and we talked about how to tackle this issue, because it's difficult. It's a difficult issue, particularly for two white blokes, but we certainly have to tackle it, and there's no better time to tackle it in light of the recent fantastic Black Lives Matter movement, which is, at the time of recording, is very, very topical, as it should be, because Black Lives do matter, and there's still a load of terrible racism in the world going on, police brutality, and in just endemic in society and in lots of organisations. And H.P. Lovecraft was a racist, and I don't think that can be disputed. And some people will try to dispute that. There is a poem that he wrote that is a full-blown, offensive racist poem, which I won't read out here because I don't think anyone wants to hear that. But this is not oh, he was just 19th century, it's, it's of the time.
Yeah.
This was a man who had a deep-rooted mistrust and hatred of foreigners, and some of his works, we've been heralding all of his achievements, but some of his works are pretty openly racist in that they speak of a fear of, tainted blood and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, the idea of, there's one of the stories, I think there's a man driven mad because he finds out that he's of mixed ancestry, basically. So it's you could see that this particular man had a particular hang up with this particular concept of people from different ethnic backgrounds being in relationships and having children.
And as you say, there is one poem in particular that's just outright, racist. And because I was unaware of this, I'd always heard about Lovecraft potentially being racist. And as you say, there are parts of his stories where you think, oh yeah, that's a bit iffy, and you can kind of maybe make that argument. Oh well, it's just a different time. But yeah, some of it is there's just no defending it really.
Yeah, that agreed.
It does make it a bit. It really does kind of sour the thing really, because
it's a really difficult one for anyone who's a fan because it is the ultimate example of that kind of, can you separate the art from the artist? And, is it even morally defensible to be a fan of someone who, held these terrible views? And obviously I'm not going to lie, I am a fan of H.P. Lovecraft, so I think you can separate the art from the artist. I think you can enjoy someone's work even if the person who produced the work was a dick. But it's right to keep having that discussion and to keep challenging it, and a lot of people will strongly disagree with me about that, and they'll say, you shouldn't be a fan. That's partly one of the reasons we picked him as a topic for this episode, really, was to kind of challenge ourselves a bit on that issue. But it is an odd one, isn't it? Because on one hand, you've got an increasing awareness among people in general and his fan base of his racism.
Yeah.
But you've also got an ever-increasing popularity and sort of, it's the wrong word, ubiquity in his stuff, his work being just plastered all over the place. Board games, video games, other writers, films. So it is a very odd...
I suppose my view would be that kind of the sort of subject, the things he wrote about, things he created, have become bigger than he is.
Yes.
And now exist outside of... They're not just tied to him anymore. They've become part of popular culture.
Yeah, and for better or worse, it would be an untruth to claim that they were not, because they are, because they're very famous and very influential. So I sort of think the right way to approach it is to just make sure everyone's aware of the issue. And there's books that I haven't read it yet, to my shame. I bought it ages ago. It's been sat on my shelf, but there's that book Lovecraft Country. It's a 2016 dark fantasy horror by Matt Ruff. It's trying to tackle a conjunction between Lovecraft's horror fiction and racism in the United States. Oh, wow. And that's actually been made into a TV series. So that definitely is worth checking out. I haven't read it yet, but that is now a TV show as well as a best-selling novel. So that's a commendable attempt, isn't it, to kind of reconcile the two aspects of this almost.
And the point I made about kind of his works becoming bigger than he is, most of my kind of Lovecraftian horror now isn't from Lovecraft. It's in the movies we mentioned, the video games we mentioned, the other kind of books we mentioned, so stuff not actually directly written by but inspired by Lovecraft. So I do think that's like I said, a valid point, that it is bigger than he is. And even if you may never have read a Lovecraft short story or novella, but you probably have consumed
a bloke with a squid for a head.
Yeah, something that he's influenced. So
yeah,
I think you can be a fan of Lovecraftian fiction without really being a fan of his.
You certainly don't have to subscribe to all his views
without even having to really read any of his work.
I mean, I would say my favourite piece of Lovecraftian fiction is not a Lovecraft novella or short story, it's Bloodborne.
Yeah, me too.
So it's become this kind of like founding text almost that you can build from, especially now it's free.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess with that in mind, our decision to whether or not H.P. Lovecraft merits a place in the Hall of Pain is a difficult one, because although we've put some really, really horrible people in there, like the one that springs to mind is the bloke from Creep.
Yeah.
Like, he's really horrible, but he's the worst of them all. But yeah, it feels like a welcoming, eclectic, diverse place. So to be honest, my view would be he's not welcome in it.
In a shock twist, end of series twist, we are both agreeing that H.P. Lovecraft does not get into the Hall of Pain. Am I right in saying that?
You are right. We've decided to swerve our legions of fans, and many of whom will now be scribbling. Many of whom are probably massive Lovecraft fans. Will be frantically scribbling hate mail to send to us. And well, with that in mind, what we thought we'd do as a pathetic Weasley compromise is that we'd allow someone else to accept the award instead. So we'd offer up the residence, the final place, that 25th berth in the hallowed halls of the Hall of Pain, to someone else. Do you want to know who it is, Liam?
I do.
He's sitting right alongside my window, and his eye is kind of larger than my balcony.
Wow. Who is it?
It is Cthulhu. Cthulhu's turned up, which is nice of him. Not sure if he'll be able to understand me, but Cthulhu.
And he'll enjoy it down there, won't he? Because he just sleeps. Yeah, he just sleeps for centuries, doesn't he? Hibernates.
He sleeps. He does a lot of sleeping. There's plenty of opportunity. We've had him a specially custom-built, extra-large wing installed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think he seems quite excited. He's currently eating. He's just eating a few of the neighbours now. There's almost like a starter. Cthulhu, have you got any words? Have you got anything to say? And then I was going to cut in, like a clip of him going like, blah, 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 blah. That was the punchline.
I thought for a minute you wanted me to do that, but I'm glad you didn't.
Oh, well, go on. You can have a go. It's almost like he's in the room with me. It's very convincing. You went for like a higher pitched Cthulhu.
I don't know what I was doing, to be honest. Something came out.
You did like a baby Cthulhu.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that. But yeah, Cthulhu, welcome to the Hall of Pain.
Welcome to Cthulhu. Well done on your achievements of sleeping mainly. That's all he really does. He does actually get. He wakes up in the one called The Call of Cthulhu, and I think the protagonist has to ram a boat into his head to escape. But that's just, what's that going to do? Buy you a bit of time. Cthulhu's not going to be stopped by a boat in the head. And still went mad, didn't he? Still went mad. He still had the last laugh. So there we go. End of an era. It is a bit sad, isn't it? Very sad. Do you think the last ever episode is a good time to come up with our sign-off that we haven't come up with on any other preceding episode? Definitely. Have you come up with one? No. No, I've not either. Thank you everyone for joining us for this final episode of the first series of Dark Natter. It's been a really enjoyable year, despite being a very challenging one, particularly in recent months with the virus outbreak, but we're glad to have made it through to the end. Huge thanks also go to Ross Budgeon for the theme music we've used throughout the series, as well as to all the entrants into the Hall of Pain, who will now go into hibernation for the summer until we return, possibly in a few months, once we've had a chance to rest and recuperate and focus on a few other projects, which is a euphemism for drink loads. I thought I'd close out by recapping the official first 25 entrants into the Hall of Pain in order of entry as follows. Stephen King, Silent Hill, The Blair Witch Project, Alien, Bloodborne, Slender Man, Halloween, The Terminator, Ghostwatch, Disneyland's Haunted Mansion, with thanks to Ryan Heyman, who made a guest appearance on that episode, Black Christmas, Mortal Kombat, with thanks to our mate Hayden Killian, who appeared as Liam's stand-in for that show, Junji Ito, Dark Souls, Salad Fingers, Creep, that's the 2014 movie, not the slightly older other horror movie with the same name, Master of Chaos, and the rest of the Fighting Fantasy game books, Resident Evil, Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, Return to Oz, Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049, Bioshock, The League of Gentlemen, with thanks to Abby, who wrote in to recommend the show, Twin Peaks, and Cthulhu. I don't know what was going on with my voice there, I sounded a bit like Matt Berry. I'd also like to thank Liam for recording the whole series with me. He can never be asked to stick around to do this outro bit, but he can be asked to do all the rest of the show, and he's done a great job and been a delightful co-host. So much so that I've now shaved my head in his honour, which means that we both now quite closely resemble our Gleaming Skulls logo. Thank you, Liam. Love you, man. A final plug from me before I go. So even though we are slumbering, we are never truly gone. So you can follow us on Twitter at @dark_natter or on Instagram at darknatterpodcast. You can also find me, John Richter, on Twitter at RichterWrites or on Instagram at JohnRichterWrites. That's John, Jon. No, there's no H in it. I'd be honoured if you'd visit my website at www.john-richter.com or look me up on Amazon, where you'll find my books, including my latest dark crime thriller, Rabbit Hole, which is available for purchase in paperback or for your e-reader device. I actually uploaded an audio trailer for Rabbit Hole a couple of weeks before this episode, so if you check out our feed, you'll be able to give that a listen. Well, that is it from us for a while. We really, really hope you've enjoyed listening to our dark natterings, and hopefully we'll be back again soon. Until then, look after yourselves and don't have too many nightmares.